A young woman walked into a small local bakery one chilly autumn morning, her arms wrapped tightly around her coat to ward off the biting wind. She made her way to the counter, a smile on her face despite the weight of the day ahead. It had been a rough week for her. Work had been draining and her personal life had been filled with uncertainty. She had come in for something sweet to lift her spirits. As she stood in line, two men in suits walked in, laughing loudly, making jokes that were clearly meant to be heard by everyone in the room. The first man, seeing her standing by the counter, bumped into her as he passed by, knocking her coffee cup from her hand. It splashed onto the floor, but instead of apologizing, he sneered and said, "Watch where you're standing, sweetheart." The second man, chuckling, gave her an eye roll and muttered something sarcastic under his breath. They both sat down at a nearby table, continuing their conversation with no regard for her flustered expression. The young woman stood there, heart sinking. She'd been dealing with so much lately, and now even something as small as this seemed to weigh heavily on her. The waitress behind the counter, seeing the situation unfold, quietly offered her a replacement coffee, but the woman, shaking, didn't know if she could bring herself to stay. Without saying anything, she grabbed her purse, and just as she turned to leave, the door opened, and a man in his mid-60s walked in, wearing a worn jacket and carrying a weathered backpack. He stood in line behind her, but instead of ordering immediately, he looked over at the two men, still laughing. Without warning, he marched over to their table. The two men looked up, clearly surprised by his sudden approach. The old man simply said, "You know, you're not as funny as you think you are," before turning and walking out of the bakery without another word. The young woman, still holding her purse, watched the old man walk to the door, feeling a surge of warmth inside her. The two men sat frozen for a moment, unsure of how to respond. As they finally turned back to their conversation, their voices had lowered, and the arrogant edge to their words had faded. The young woman, now standing with a renewed sense of dignity, turned back to the counter. She smiled at the waitress and quietly ordered a new cup of coffee. As she waited, she glanced at the door, where the old man had exited, his simple act of kindness echoing in her heart. It wasn't much, but it had been enough to remind her that kindness, even when unexpected, could stand up to cruelty. The waitress, sensing the shift in energy, looked at her with a knowing smile. "You know," she said, "sometimes all it takes is one person standing up to make the world feel a little less heavy." The young woman smiled back, grateful not only for the man's words, but for the reminder that even in small moments, kindness could change everything. And she left the bakery that morning, not with a bitter heart, but with a sense of strength she hadn't expected to find.